This is your 28storms.com and Hurricane Tracker app tropical weather update for this Sunday afternoon, October 9th. Starting first in the Atlantic Basin, the only system of interest is this subtropical surface low that has now formed just to the east of West Palm Beach, Florida. The Hurricane Center is still monitoring this for a subtropical storm classification. They are giving the system a 30% chance of doing just that within the next 48 hours. The latest satellite imagery from this afternoon shows that we still have a very complex pattern with an upper level low located over the southeast Gulf. There are some signs of that low working its way down to the surface, but the stronger of the two surface lows is now located on the east coast of Florida, and that's pumping in quite a lot of moisture out of the tropics, and it's unloading all across the Florida peninsula. We see flood watches in effect for much of the state, and the rainfall threat will continue for the next 48 to 72 hours. The good news for southern Florida is that it appears that a dry slot is working its way in. We still have the risk of some isolated shower activity over the next 24 hours, but the greatest threat of heavy rainfall is beginning to shift into central and northern Florida, and eventually Georgia and the Carolinas. The latest zoomed-in visible of the state of Florida shows what is occurring even better. We see a cyclonic rotation here in the low-level clouds over the southeast Gulf. However, that surface low will not be overly strong, as we do have an upper-level low located directly above it. The better dynamics is located just off the coast of Florida on the east side, and that is where we have the surface low trying to get its act together. And if it wasn't for the upcoming landfall, this system would more than likely have a very good chance at becoming a classified subtropical storm. However, all of the model guidance has this surface low tracking inland over the next 24 hours and eventually going into Georgia, so time is really running out. This is still primarily going to be a heavy rainfall event with the risk of some high winds exceeding tropical storm force, mainly along the coastal areas of Florida. We are also still closely monitoring the latest surface observations around the state, and the lowest surface pressures are located in the general vicinity where we saw that cyclonic rotation just to the east of West Palm Beach. And here it is right around here. You can begin to make out the initiating surface low here, and the Melbourne, Florida radar has already detected rainfall totals in excess of 10 inches in several locations. And based on the latest radar animation, we can see that the low pressure area is working its way closer to the coastline, and rainfall totals in and around the Melbourne area is going to go way up during the overnight hours as some of these heavier bands begin to spread inland as the whole system in general begins to move west-northwest or northwest. The latest run of the 12Z GFS model shows the broad area of low pressure to the east of Florida working its way inland over the next 24 hours, and over the next 7 days it will mainly just rain itself out over the east coast before being absorbed by a larger non-tropical system over the mid-Atlantic and northeast. The 12Z run of the CMC is also in general agreement with this overall idea. We are now going to take a closer look at the 12Z ECMWF. By 24 hours, the surface low has continued to move west-northwest and has actually made it into the extreme northeast Gulf. Now, the other models are indicating a similar track, but even if this does get into the northeast Gulf, it will have moved a little bit closer to that upper level low. So we still don't think that this is going to have much of a chance to become a classified system in the northeast Gulf, but the bottom line is we will continue to monitor things, but classification or no classification, the overall impacts across much of the state will be generally the same. And as we go into Wednesday morning, the low is beginning to track up into Georgia, and as we go into Thursday and Friday, we can see that it has been absorbed by this long wave trough over much of the eastern United States. Now, we may not be done here in the tropics in the western side of the basin. By day 6, we have a developing area of low pressure. Again, this is heading into the middle part of next weekend, and this is the same exact setup that allowed our system near Florida to develop in the first place. We have a developing area of surface high pressure over the lower Mississippi Valley, and that is going to promote surface low formation here in the western Caribbean. And what is a little bit more interesting this time around is that this type of pattern would support true tropical cyclogenesis this time around. And if the upper level conditions remain a little bit more favorable, then we could be dealing with a stronger system. And as we go into day 8 or next Monday, we have a tropical system making landfall along the upper Yucatan Peninsula. Of course, this is a very extended forecast, but the ECMWF does have model support from the other model members. This is the day 9 0Z CMC forecast, and you can see subtle hints of a 1004 millibar surface low that is just off the frame here, and as we go into day 10, we see even more indication that we very well could have a hurricane on our hands based on the latest 10-day Canadian CMC forecast. The GFS model is not the most reliable model, especially after the resolution change beyond 192 hours, but nevertheless, much like the other model guidance, as we go into day 10, it also has a developing tropical system just off the Central American coast in the Western Caribbean. Furthermore, both climatology and the enhancing phase of the MJO that is now spreading into the Gulf and Caribbean would also suggest a fairly good chance of tropical development here within the next 10 or so days. Now, as we work our way into the Eastern Pacific, we have three tropical systems worth monitoring, but none more important than Hurricane Jova, which is set to become a major hurricane before striking Mexico. As of the 2 p.m. Pacific Time advisory from the National Hurricane Center, maximum sustained winds have increased to 90 miles per hour. It's currently moving off toward the east at 8 miles per hour, but we are expecting a turn more toward the northeast. And look at the forecast by 11 a.m. Tuesday. That is when Jova is expected to become a Category 3 major hurricane, and we now have hurricane watches in effect for much of the Mexican coastline. And as we work our way into Wednesday and Thursday, it should gradually diminish over some of the higher terrain. Now, just within the last few hours, the hurricane hunters went ahead and flew into the hurricane, and they have verified the latest intensity. In fact, the trend of the central pressure as the hurricane hunters were beginning to leave is that the pressure was decreasing. It was at 980 millibars, and at the very last pass it had decreased down to 976 millibars, which is certainly a sign of more intensification. The latest model consensus is definitely beginning to center itself in and around Manzanillo, Mexico, so all interests within this entire area need to be preparing now before the weather begins to go downhill. Furthermore, this is a quick look at the available intensity model guidance, and we have quite a number of model members that are taking this to Category 3 hurricane status right before landfall. This is the latest microwave animation from the SIMS website, and we see that Hurricane Jova is becoming more organized. We see that the eye is starting to contract, and also that eye wall-like feature is becoming more prominent with time. As mentioned in the latest official National Hurricane Center discussion, Hurricane Jova has all the earmarks of becoming the next major hurricane. As we turn to the latest satellite imagery, we can even see the eye beginning to develop here underneath the middle of that central dense overcast. It can also be seen on the latest enhanced infrared imagery. And as we turn to the latest water vapor, this is a good depiction as to what is occurring in the mid to upper layers of the atmosphere, and we have a very good outflow pattern across all quadrants of this hurricane. So Jova has all the room that it needs to intensify all the way up until the time that it makes landfall, and hopefully all citizens living along the Mexican coastline, especially near Manzanillo, hopefully they are aware of the incoming threat posed by this developing hurricane. Unfortunately, we are still also dealing with Tropical Storm Irwin. It has weakened more since yesterday. Winds are now down to 50 miles per hour. However, it is still officially forecast to remain a tropical storm throughout the forecast period. And sure enough, as we go into 11 a.m. on Friday, the official forecast is taking this system just to the south of Manzanillo, Mexico. However, as I've been saying for the last 48 hours, the 5-day forecast for this storm is still highly in question. This is the latest look at the spaghetti model plots for Irwin, and sure enough, the models diverge quite a lot as to when exactly the system could change direction. We see some of the models are initially taking the system more toward the north. However, this is somewhat of an unlikely scenario. However, as we go into days 4 and 5, some of the models are taking this more toward the north, whereas some of the other remaining models are bending it more toward the southeast. And this is just a perfect example as to just how inconsistent the models are being. This is the latest look at the GFS ensemble members, and we have half of the ensembles taking the system more toward the north, whereas the others are taking it more toward the southeast and away from the coastline. In addition, the intensity forecast is greatly dependent on what is going to occur with the overall forecast track, but the good news is that none of the intensity models are taking Irwin back to hurricane status at this current time. Tropical Storm Irwin now has much more convection compared to this time yesterday, when the surface circulation was void of any significant convection. However, on the last couple frames of the visible animation, it almost looks as though the surface circulation is becoming exposed from the north yet again, and on the latest infrared we see that convection is at least temporarily decreasing at the moment, and the latest water vapor shows the overall problem that Tropical Storm Irwin is experiencing. Hurricane Jova is becoming more intense, and the outflow being evacuated from that system is disrupting the inner core of Tropical Storm Irwin. This is unlikely to change over the next several days, and so therefore Irwin will likely remain as a tropical storm at best throughout the forecast period. So that sums up what is occurring in the tropics on this Sunday afternoon. Please stick with 28storms.com and the Hurricane Tracker app throughout the duration of all of these tropical systems, especially Hurricane Jova as it inches closer toward the Mexican coastline.